Several weeks ago, Matt asked me, he said, hey, you want to be part of the series, right? This whole apologetics type series, the tough questions people ask. And I said, okay, sure. What do you want me to speak on? He said, what do you want to speak on? I said, I don't know. What do you want me to speak on? I don't know. What do you want? So we went back and forth. Finally, he says, why don't you just do the one on suffering? I said, okay, good. The one on suffering. Okay, well, I teach apologetics in high school and have for several years now. And there's two things that I know for absolute certain. Number one, I know what it looks like when a high schooler no longer understands what I'm talking about. It's this glazed over sort of appearance that it's characterized by a sense of shock and frightened, looking about, hoping that they're not the only one that's completely lost, shortness of breath, dilated pupils, profuse sweating, which, as I recall telling you, they're high schoolers, right? Some of them have a questionable relationship with deodorant, so I will say that it's not always a good thing. I'm hoping today to avoid that look on your face. So if you start to feel that way, if you can just do this at me or whatever, just yeah, we're on track, and I'll get through it. I'll hope that you stay on. The other thing that I know for absolute certain is that this idea, this topic of God and his existence and human suffering is the most often posed objection to God's existence. I know that it's been hotly debated by the greatest minds this earth has ever known for thousands of years. And according to the Barna Research Group, this is the number one question that Christians hope that no one will ever ask them. And it's generally considered to be the number one issue causing people to doubt or disbelieve in God's existence. So why don't you take the one on suffering, Matt says. And I'll give you 30 minutes to do it. Appreciate that, Matthew, as he's in Disneyland. I welcome the challenge, and I'm just going to say that there's more to cover than we have time to cover. I have researched well beyond, at one point I had 14 or 15 books out, and I'm looking, that doesn't help, by the way. That only served to make me have to cut down material, and I'm going to try to do my best to handle the topic today, does God allow suffering? What I want to present to you is not this nicely wrapped, neat package with a ribbon and a bow that matches and that you can take with you and go, oh, cool, I have the simple answer here to this profound question. If that were the case, it would look something like this. Does God exist? Yes, he does. Does God allow suffering? Why, it appears he does. Ushers, if you'd like to come to the front and take the offering, we can go now, right? Rather, I'd like to simply, humbly, and very carefully deal with a difficult subject, one of which I'm no expert. So, I need to pray. Jesus, I trust you. And I know that we as human beings suffer. And we need you today to help us understand. So would you open our hearts today so that we would? In your name. So we had to put the why on there. Why does God allow suffering? The fact is, this is how it starts, right? Suffering and evil exist. We know that. Look around the world. We see that. That's obvious. When one considers the extent and depth of suffering in the world, natural disasters, the inhumanity of man, treating man poorly, you have to admit that maybe it's difficult to believe that God does exist. It's hard to believe in God. Epicurus, fancy Greek philosophizer, he said it this way. If God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he's not omnipotent. If he's able but not willing, then he's malevolent. If he's both able and willing, then whence cometh evil? Like I said, it's ancient. If he's neither able nor willing, then why call him God? Let me Lucanize that for you. In other words, put it in Luke's language. If God wants to prevent evil or suffering, but he can't, then he's not all-powerful. Right? Well, if he's able to do it, but he just isn't willing, then he's just straight up mean. If he's capable of doing it and he wants to do it, then why is there evil? But if he's not capable and unwilling to do it, then why would we call him God? I want to present a theodicy to you today. Now, my son came up last week and got all fancy with his science terminology and whatnot, so I had to make sure that I at least threw a couple of big words at you so you thought that I was, somewhat intelligent. Smart kid, that one. I can still beat him in a wrestling match, though. That's like, might makes right. That's the rule of the house. All right. A theodicy. A theodicy simply is... it's an answer to the question why God permits evil or suffering, right? It's just simply a response is what it is, okay? This is an intellectual issue, and it's also an emotional issue. So it's intellectual in that we deal with the idea of whether or not it's plausible that God and suffering actually can coexist. The emotional side of it is that if that is the case, then we kind of have a dislike for a God who would permit such suffering. I'm not talking about you specifically, but as humankind, we have an issue intellectually and emotionally with this idea. I love what W.L. Craig says, probably the smartest man on the planet currently. He says, their unbelief is born not out of refutation, but out of rejection. In other words, people are not so much not believing it's possible that God exists, they just don't want anything to do with him because look around you. Look at the suffering that goes on, and why would God let that happen? If that's the kind of God he is, then I don't want anything to do with him. So we need to handle both issues today. And if you will go with me on this journey, we're going to go and start with the intellectual, and then we'll lead to the emotional. Because honestly, that's probably where most of us are. It's not so much that we doubt that God exists or could coexist. Some people are probably intellectual skeptics, are intellectually skeptical about it, or are skeptics. And I want to at least deal with part of that argument so that we can get on with that and move on into the emotional side of that. Okay, so the intellectual or logical version of this argument is, it is logically impossible for God and suffering to coexist. Okay, you have an all-powerful, all-loving God, he exists, and suffering exists. They will claim, or an atheist would claim, or someone who would take this side would claim that these are logically inconsistent. They can't both be true. And so if we were going to take this in an apologetic fashion, we would have to address that claim, okay? And so we want to do that. The first thing I would say is that there is no explicit contradiction here, okay? Even though it sounds like I'm not sure how they would coexist, actually they're not contradictory. It is possible or plausible that both of these things can be true, okay? They're logically compatible, all right? So the second point is that if we deal with this as a point of view, we have to address the two hidden assumptions here, okay? Hidden assumption number one is that if God is all-powerful, then he could create any world he wants to. So he's omnipotent, all-powerful. Then he could make whatever world he wants, right? The second assumption is that, well, if God's all-loving, then naturally he would prefer to make a world where there is no suffering. You see, the logic breaks down not over there, but this is where we start to have an issue. And so if these assumptions are true, then we have to go back and say, well, then it probably is true that they could not coexist. But let's quickly look at these. Hidden assumption number one, if God is all-powerful, then he could create any world he wants to. And that actually is not accurate. Well, wait a minute, God can't do something? Actually, yeah, God can't lie. He can't break out of his character. He can't do something that's contradictory to his nature. And another thing he cannot do is make any world he wants to if free will is part of the formula. if in the soup that he wants to make, free will is part of the ingredients or one of the ingredients to the soup, then it is logically impossible, okay, to force someone to do something who has free will. So if free will is part of it, then he cannot make a world, any world he wants to, okay? So I hope you follow that logic. If he wants free will to be part of it or adds free will, then he cannot construct any world he wants to, okay? Again, just do that, okay? So where there are free moral agents, people with free will, all bets are off. There are no guarantees that this world would be a world without suffering, okay? The second hidden assumption is if God is all loving, he prefers a world without suffering. But does he? Well, it would seem so, but no. Not if he has some overriding reason to allow suffering. Is there something that he values more than the absence of suffering? You take your kid to the dentist? Come on, parents. At least fake it. Yes, I do. Why do you do that? Because you like to see him in pain. No, Daddy, no, dentist, not the dentist. You know what? Look, when you get ready for your first date and you go brush your tooth because, you didn't go, it's not attractive, son. Brush your teeth, right? We got to go to the dentist. We got to take care of it. But it's unpleasant. I understand that, but there's something I value more than your comfort. Right? Pretty easy to understand. Okay, so our conclusion is simple. It is possible that, given human free will, God could have created another world where the good to suffering balance is better than this world. God has good reason. Wait, I think I'm reading this wrong. It is possible that, given free will, God could not have. I missed a word. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. So I'm just going to Lucanize that again. Okay. If free will is part of it, it's actually possible that this is as good as it can get when you weigh out suffering versus benefit, right? So you've got suffering and good things that happen. This might be the arrangement where the maximal good can come from a world where there is free will. Okay? And he has sufficient reasons for allowing suffering. Okay, good. Right? That's the logical part of it. I know, I got a little glazed over there with you. Good. So that's why we take apologetics, the introduction to apologetics, and we teach over an entire school year. Okay. So let's go on to the emotional, because this is really where most of us are probably at. If you're still skeptical, I understand that, and that takes a while to maybe navigate some of that. But God and pain and suffering can coexist. So, you say, God and suffering can logically coexist. That's great. I'm just not so sure I believe that all this suffering is somehow necessary or justified. I don't know how to make sense of my own pain or the pain that I see other people going through. There cannot be any good reason for this. Quick detour. Pain. Pain is universal. You all have pain. You all experience suffering. Everybody on the planet does. Secondly, pain is individual. Your pain is your pain. How you experience that, how you walk through that is individually you. That is your pain. And pain is not comparative. In other words, it doesn't qualify for suffering if it's not as bad as somebody else's. And sometimes we look at our pain and we say, well, this is what I'm going through, but I don't know in how it compares. Is this bad enough to actually be considered suffering? I remember holding you when we lost Naomi. I remember the brokenness, the feeling like I may never breathe again. I remember. But is that as bad as the parent who loses a child at 5? Is that as bad as the parent who loses a child at 15? A mommy and daddy who say goodbye to their 30-year-old? Is it so bad? Went to Guatemala and I went to an orphanage and I held this young girl, this little tiny baby girl, big smile. Her name is Dulce, and she has scars all over her arms. And as I fed her baby food. I was told the story that at 2 days old, she was thrown into the garbage, thrown into a literal garbage pile. They saved her, found her, and saved her life. Been to Nicaragua, Villa Esperanza, where they rescue young girls from horrific circumstances. They live in the dump, and when the garbage trucks come through, moms take their 11-year-old girls and give them to the drivers for an hour so they can get a better spot to get a better part of the garbage. At what point does suffering become suffering? At what point does my heart become rent to the point where it's not comparative? I don't know how bad is bad enough. I don't know how suffering is individual, it's universal, and it's real. It's real. And there can't be any good reason for this, is how we're tempted to look at that. Here's what I would say. I would just simply say that we are not qualified. We're not in a position to make that judgment. We're not. Just because it seems that suffering is unjustified doesn't mean that it truly is. Our perspective is really limited. Zachary doesn't understand why his bedtime's 7:30. Well, tomorrow, if you don't get enough sleep, you're not even human. And you ruin everything you touch, including my entire day, mom's entire day, which makes things even worse for the rest of the kids. And everybody's like, right? We understand why, even though you can't put those things together. Boy, don't play in the road. Why not? You don't have time to teach you physics. Mass times acceleration. Dude, look at the ball. There's the ball. No, don't go on the road. Right? My narrow view is ball. I want ball. Right? Truck, big truck. I'm not as a human. I'm not in a place where I can make that. Oh, I must have clicked it. I'm not in a place where I can make this statement. There cannot be any good reason for this. Okay? So what's your point? It's got to suck it up, buttercup? Just deal? Sucks to be you? No. Let's go back to the beginning, okay? Why didn't God just make a world where there wasn't any suffering? Why didn't he just make a world where there was no pain, where there was no sorrow, where there's no... Oh yeah, he did. It's called Eden. And it will be called heaven. We'll return to that place where God's place, the heavens and the earth, man's place, overlap that place called Eden. So maybe at this point we can take some responsibility and say, okay, well, we have to start with the acknowledgement that humans played some role in this, right? Because we all, Adam and Eve, and you and I, we all know better, right? And we do it our own way. Well, that brings some of this and opens the door for it in our world. So you're saying mankind messed up then, right? And wasn't it God who gave man this free will to mess up? So maybe it's God's fault. Well, no, because giving somebody a free choice and making that choice, not the same thing. That opens up another, I'm going to have to come back here because there's a long conversation that could be had there. So why then allow free will? If free will is where everything went wrong, right? Everything was good until free will came on, then everything went wrong. Why not just go ahead and eliminate that one ingredient from the soup? Then we would take out the weak link, and that would suffice. One problem: if there's no free will, there's no love. Now, check this out. You could still be loved by God, but you could not love God. You could not love each other. You could not be loved by each other. I could, however, simply walk out my programming like a good little robot. So love is what we would say is a morally sufficient reason for pain. If we just stop right there, we've actually got a sufficient answer. If that were the only reason, that is a morally sufficient reason because it trumps everything. But I don't want to stop there. Love gets us in the door. But I want to give you a biblical perspective. Let me handle 6 or 7 things real quick. So what does the Bible have to say, right? What is this? What else is there? Love is the key. Yes. Love's the open door. Yes. Love's the thing. Great. But what else? All right. So, number one, the chief purpose of life, you tell your kids this, is not happiness, right? It's really the knowledge of God. So, knowing God and being known by God is actually the very purpose of our life. And it's the only thing that's going to bring true, lasting hope, fulfillment, goodness. It's the thing. Happiness won't. Make your kid happy. Does that give him full life? Not necessarily. We're not his pets. His primary concern is not our comfort. Now, if within the scope of just my comfort, yes, pain and suffering seem pointless. But in the scope of something much, much deeper and greater, lasting human fulfillment that comes from the knowledge of God, okay, that makes more sense. If this plays a role somehow in that, that explains it better. Okay? Knowing God and being known by God. The second thing, suffering is brief and temporary. And I don't mean to be trite about that, but think of it perspective-wise, right? This lifetime we have, the Bible calls it a mist, you're but a breath. It's this super tiny, it's really barely, it's not even a blip on the radar in eternity. Imagine 11 billion years times 11 billion years times the Googleplex of years, and you haven't even gotten close to eternity. You're just tipping into it. And for I'm going to live to be 107 probably. You got to keep up with me, right? For that, it's not the percentage is not even, it's not even a blip on the radar. Now, that doesn't minimize your life. It actually kind of maximizes it. Of what happens in this blip is so great, so amazing, that if we take the perspective that God's purpose spills over into eternity, so when he looks at you, he doesn't go, well, I've got some stuff for you to do in about the next 10 years or so, and then after that, I'm done with you. No, I have you from the time, actually before you were born. I knew you before I knit you together in your mother's womb, and I have these plans for you, right? And I have all these things, and this spills over into all of eternity. So in the moment, I know it's hard not to chase ball because what we see is this, but if you can take a perspective of eternity, we realize that suffering is brief and it's temporary. It's going to be over with. God's going to be done with that, and we're going to move on to something much greater. So Revelation tells us. I love what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 2:14, or 2 Corinthians 4. Did I put it up there? I did. Oh, cool. Sometimes I forget what I do. That is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles, suffering, right? Our present suffering are small and won't last very long. Yet, value, they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. So Paul's taking a perspective here that says, I know what you see right here, but if you look up and look at, you will see that, wow, it's this much. It's super, super impactful, yes, but in the scope of eternity, this is doing something so good for you. Now you might say, yeah, but Paul didn't have any troubles. Just read 2 Corinthians 11. People that are laughing have read it before. Yeah. Great perspective from Paul. Let's see. Next. Suffering's a doorway. Quickly. These are like 5 or 6 benefits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 benefits that come directly from, or maybe indirectly from, suffering. Grounding, what do you mean? 2 Corinthians 12, Paul had a thorn in his side. He asked God, we don't know what it is really. Could have been a physical ailment, could have been whatever. He asked God 3 times, take it away, please take it away, please take it away. And God said, nope, please take it away, nope, please take it away, nope. And finally he said, look, I'm not taking it away because I don't want you to become conceited. I don't want you to get full of yourself. I want to keep you grounded. And pain is a great grounding influence. So, good, okay, right? It's like, yay. All right, empathy. 2 Corinthians 1. I think I wrote this one down. Maybe I've got it in there. Maybe I'll see if it's there. It's not, okay. 2 Corinthians 1. I can tell you what it says. When you hurt, God comes and comforts you. That comfort he comforts you with, you can take and go and comfort others with. We gain the capacity to hurt with those who hurt, right? You ladies are holding hands up here or earlier. Why? Because the comfort that God has given you, you've been able to share with your friend. And I won't put you on the spot. I love you. But does that mean anything to you as the tears fall down from your eyes? To know I'm not alone, for someone to come alongside of me and to hurt with, it means everything. If I don't hurt, I have a harder time with empathy. It's a gift. Comfort. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Growth, maturity, James 1:1-6. Love this. I've been reading this verse every single morning for the past 5 or 6 weeks. I've been teaching my apologetics, actually all 4 of my Bible classes. This verse, we've been doing an in-depth Bible study on it. And crazily enough, God has opened up so many doors where I've been able to share just not Bible says. No, just James 1:1-6 deals with when you face trials, difficulties, troubles, sufferings, of various kinds, of many different kinds, of any kind. Those are 3 different versions. Of any kind. Troubles of any kind. So whatever your trouble is, when you face it, think of this with joy. Because the testing of your faith, because what you're going to go through in that suffering is going to produce in you maturity and growth, endurance, and that endurance, when it has its full effect, is going to make you different. And I love what Paul says. Let it grow. Let it grow. Let it grow. Tremendous. Oh, no time for that story. Trust. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. And he'll direct your paths. Trust in God with all your heart. Don't lean on your understanding. Great. Suffering. All right. So there's some good stuff that comes from it. Please note this. Suffering is redeemable. This is so important for us to recognize as humans. God can take bad and make good out of it. I would rather God take good and make better out of it, but it doesn't always work that way. In John 21, bad day at work. You got the disciples out in the boat and they're fishing, and they come back an entire night of fishing from professional fishermen. You know what they got? Squat, nothing, bupkis, right? They don't even have a minnow. They got nothing, and they're coming back in probably a little dejected. And Jesus, of course, on the show, are going, "Hey, and he knows, right? He knows the answer. How'd it go?" They're like, "We didn't catch anything. Fine, make fun of us." Why don't you just toss the net on the other side of the boat? Oh, thanks for that advice, Mr. Rabbi Carpenter. We'll do the fishing here. You go ahead and do your thing. We'll do ours. Not what they said. It's what I might have said, but so they did, right? A seemingly really bad day at work, and all of a sudden, in moments, their nets are filled to overflowing. They can't actually get them into the boat hardly. It starts to sink the boat. I mean, talk about suffering is redeemable. A bad day at work can turn into something phenomenal. God is in that business. Bad 4 days all wrapped up. Mary and Martha hustle over to Jesus, say, Jesus, our brother Lazarus, he's sick. Will you come and help him out? Like you've helped all of these people. We know who you are. Come on over here. Will you help him? And Jesus is like, yeah, I'll be there. Don't step on the Millennium Falcon. That's dangerous. I really want to play with it, though. It's hard to be this close to it. Now we're going, okay. He's back there going, okay. So Jesus delays, right? And delays and delays and delays. Finally, Lazarus ends up dying. And they come over like going, don't bother the teacher now. He's dead. Thanks. If you were here, right, things would have been different. And Jesus said, it's a good thing for you. It's good for you that this has happened. Wait. Hold up, what? It's good for me you let my brother die. God redeems suffering. He goes and he speaks to Lazarus and he says, Lazarus, come forth. He raises Lazarus from the dead. Here's the deal. Mary and Martha, you believe. In fact, even Martha said, I know he'll be raised at the last day because he said he was dead, yet shall he live, right? And she's like, yeah, I know he'll be resurrected. I get that. You have been taught about resurrection. You believe in the resurrection. Let me introduce myself. I am the resurrection. Can you get a hold of that? The guy said last night, that'll preach, right? Man, the truth is, I don't need to believe in the resurrection. If I need to know the resurrection, and to know Jesus as the resurrection reframes everything. But Lord, he stinketh, they say, right? He's all wrapped up. He's been in there 4 days. Now you need to know who I am. Come out, right? Raised from the dead. Bad 4 days wrapped up can turn into all kinds of good because God redeems suffering. Bad 6 hours on a cross. The worst point in human history, the worst atrocity ever committed, the worst 6 hours ever. 3 days later, the stone's gone, and there's a guy with some scars on his wrists, and he shows himself to 500 people plus, and this, what sets in motion is your life and my life and eternity. Eternity burst open at the moment when Jesus steps out of the grave. I know that when we look at the cross, I'm not trying to minimize suffering. I can't imagine being Mary at the foot of the cross watching her son suffer. I can't even begin to imagine it. But I'm so glad that in my nearsightedness, I would have stopped it, just like Peter did, right? Peter said, no, you're not going to suffer. Jesus said, I'm going to go suffer and die. Peter said, no, not while I'm alive, right? Same dude tried to stop him from washing his feet. Same dude took a sword and hacked off a dude's ear when they came to arrest him. It's like, Peter's just trying to constantly get in the way. It's me, I get it. But as Peter grew in his faith, he began to get a different perspective, and so do we. God can redeem suffering. I'm not saying you can see it from where you're at. I'm saying that God can redeem it. God can redeem it. God can redeem it. Suffering is weavable. He takes everything and weaves it together for my good. How? I have no idea. He just does. How bad is it? Weavable. How awful is it? It's weavable. Did you cause it? It's still weavable. Somebody else caused it? It's weavable. He will take it and bring good out of it in your life. How? That's what he does, because he's that good. Wow. Check this out. God chose to suffer. This is a bit heavy. God chose to suffer. In order for us to achieve eternal life, our debt had to be paid. And that debt had to be the blood of Jesus sacrificed. God becomes man, and instead of just going straight to the cross, doing it, being done, or just, firing squad, get it over with, he wept with those who wept. He watched those he loved die, get sick, struggle. He let his creation beat him, spit on him, mock him, brutalize him. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to suffer now, again, did he have to be separated from it? Yes. But he chose to suffer so that he could come suffer alongside of you, suffer for you, suffer instead of you, and suffer with you. Hebrews 4 says we have a high priest that can sympathize, suffer alongside of us. He comes alongside in my suffering, and he says, and you ever say, yeah, I know what you're going through. No, you don't. Yes, he does. He does. Because he willingly said, you know what? When I come to you, I want to be able to know what you're going through firsthand. And then I'll go through it with you. When you suffer, Jesus suffers with you because he suffered for you, because he suffered alongside of us, because he suffered. He chose to. So he could be a high priest that when he comes alongside, it means something. Not just saying, you know what, it's not that bad, it's only temporary, get over it. Chose to suffer. Wow. I hope I put this up there. This is, Alison McGrath says it like this. This expresses the deep insight that God suffered firsthand as we suffer. In the incarnation, that's God becoming human. God the Creator enters into this world of pain and suffering, not as a curious tourist, but as a committed Savior. Christians thus recognize that God's loving commitment to a suffering world was so great that God entered into it personally, not sending some representative, but choosing to share in its pain and suffering. He could have sent an errand boy, but he sent his boy, right? He could have done something from afar. He could have just tried to continue to call us up and call us out, but he came to be with us so he could live in us. He could feel what we feel as we feel it. He could suffer with us so he could call us his own. Not as a tourist, but as a committed Savior. How much ever suffering we experience, however big a mound it is, and there's a lot of it in this world. I got a lot. I've had more than I wanted, and there'll probably be more. It is outweighed by his goodness. Knowing him is eternal life. God's goodness outweighs that badness. And I love this word, incommensurably. Another big word. It defies comparison. You can't even say, well, it's like 10 times as good. It's like 100 times as good. There's no format for comparison here. They are so different that this is so much more, so much more, so much more. You can't even, it's not even like saying, well, this is like as compared to the ocean. It's not even that, because this does compare to the ocean. This is incommensurably better. It is beyond, it defies comparison. God's goodness is limitless, and it outweighs whatever it is we may face. And I'm not minimizing that. Just maximizing this, taking this for what it truly is. So, can we draw that to a conclusion? Yes, we can. Suffering. Will God allow you to suffer? Yes. God will allow you to suffer, but not for long, not alone, not in any way that he did not suffer, and not without bringing good from it for you in such a way that will help you know him better and experience his comfort and resurrection power as you put your trust in him. Yes, he will. And he'll hold you, and he'll weep with you, and he'll heal you, and he'll take you on to the next thing, and he'll never let you go. And when it's over, he'll cause you to look back, and you'll say, thank you. Thank you for that. I didn't understand at the time. Thank you for grabbing me and ripping me out of the road, even though my ball was over there. Thank you Thank you for not rejecting me when I didn't understand. Thank you for not kicking me away because when I hurt, maybe I said some things that didn't. I don't know. I struggled with it. I just don't know. I don't know. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for loving me through it. Thank you for being patient with me as I walk through the difficulty of what it means to be human. I'm not good at it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can trust him. And if there's anything that this is about, it's that. Because when my boy doesn't understand, he's like, just let me get my ball. My arms, which are strongly around him, is an act of love as I whisper into his ear, son, just trust me on this one. I got you. But it's okay. It's okay when you struggle against me. It's okay. You can trust me. And when you come to know me, you will trust me. Would you bow your heads for me?